Chapter 64, Corruption, Investigations and Infiltrations. So after you got the Nova Beam, you went after the Leviathan, right? Twilight asked eagerly. Samus smirked. Nope. I decided to backtrack and get a few more expansions and other things. Twilight blinked, tilting her head in confusion. While I understand being fully prepared, weren't the Federation getting ready to assault the pirate homeworld? Yes, Spike confirmed. And they were constantly bugging us about getting the shield down. It was really annoying. So I made a unilateral decision to be as prepared as possible before going in, Samus explained. After all, we'd be fighting Ridley, and I wanted to see if there were any upgrades available for Spike before he faced off against him again. There weren't, Spike admitted, but the excuse got the feds off our back for a time. While Twilight looked completely flabbergasted, she was the only one not laughing or at least giggling. Beyond that, Samus continued, when I'd found all the energy cells I could, we were able to fully explore the Valhalla. There was some significant information there, which I got left out of finding, Spike grumbled, pouting. Just cause it was in a vacuum and I couldn't breathe in space yet. Why didn't you just shrink to human size and put on an oxygen unit? Rundus asked. Spike stared at him for several moments before slamming his face into the table. Laughter erupted. Once the laughter subsided, Samus continued. It turned out that Dark Samus had ordered the space pirates to attack the Valhalla to steal the Aurora unit, specifically to install it on Phase, the planet of living Phazon. Doing so gave her complete control of the planet, and the ability to produce the Leviathans at an accelerated rate and determine where to aim them. What purpose did the Leviathans serve Phase? Luna asked curiously. Samus was dead silent. Reproduction, Spike explained. The Leviathans were seeds. Planted in other worlds, they slowly converted those worlds into more like Phase, worlds of living Phazon. Phase was a living planet, and a blight on all life as we knew it by its very existence. Deciding to move past that quickly, Samus continued the story. I also found a space pirate control code that we later discovered was for controlling Leviathan-based battleships, one of which was actually in orbit around the pirate homeworld. That came in useful later. After that, we returned to the pirate homeworld, and headed for the shield generator. Spike began. Entering the shield control center, Samus and Spike moved carefully, investigating how best to shut it down. After destroying a few enemies and turrets, they determined that the shield generator itself was the central pillar. At 3 points along the pillar were Phazid armor plates, guarding the structural weak points of the mechanism. Samus' X-ray visor let her see through the Phazid armor, and her Nova Beam could shoot through them. From what she could determine, the only entrances to the shield control tower was on the bottom floor. However, the control panel to expose the Phazid panels was on the top floor. Here's the plan, Samus explained. You get down to the ground floor and guard the entrances. As soon as you're in position, I'll activate the controls. You keep the hostiles off my back while I disable the shield generator. Got it, Spike agreed, leaping down to the bottom of the tower. As soon as she heard the thump of his landing, Samus activated the control panel. Much to Samus' surprise, several enemies warped in near the top, and she had to open fire immediately. Since they were equipped with special jamming tech, she wasn't able to use the X-ray visor / Nova Beam combo for instant kills, and was forced to rely on hyper mode until Spike was able to get back up and cover her back. He dealt with the enemies by the simple expedient of grabbing them and hurling them out the window. Each time a new segment of the generator pillar was disabled, more enemies appeared. While they immediately attacked Samus, they hesitated when turning on Spike. Apparently, they still couldn't quite convince themselves that he wasn't actually Ridley. I wonder if the fallout the upper window helps them make up their minds, Samus thought idly as she went after the last panel. With the final one disabled, Samus rode Spike back to the top of the tower, letting him grab hold of her and morph ball and slam her into the final slot. Detonating a bomb, the entire shield generator shut down. The shield dropped, and the defense turrets activated, trying to protect the base, but the Federation assaulted full force, with high-speed fighter craft, heavy bombers, and full carriers. The pirate homeworld was not prepared for such a full-force assault. Whoa, Rainbow gasped out, plainly excited at the mere idea of such a heavy assault. Yeah, the Federation went all out there, Samus admitted. Admittedly, that was only the one fleet. Only one fleet? Luna asked nervously. Pray tell, how many fleets of such size doth this Federation have? About 10, Samus replied with a shrug. I didn't bother to keep an exact count. If they have 10 fleets that size, Celestia asked, more than a bit odd, why do they need you? Because, Celestia, Discord pointed out logically, it doesn't matter how many sledgehammers you have in your shed if what you need is a scalpel. The fleets are obviously for pitched wars and the like, and not just with the space pirates. But for infiltration missions and things like that, hunters like her are obviously the preferred choice. And it's cheaper to hire her on a case-by-case basis than to train your own on payroll getting bored between jobs. Celestia groaned. Don't remind me, she mumbled to herself, pointedly not meeting Twilight's eyes as she turned to her in confusion. After that, Spike continued, all that was left was the assault on the path to the seed. Chapter 65, Corruption, Assault. The path to the seed itself was heavily defended, Samus explained. And aside from the defenses, it was heavily fortified. Since there wasn't any way to target some of the barricades with the ship missiles, we needed some help getting through. But you got it, right? Twilight asked. I mean, how else did you get past? Spike chuckled. Course we did. Admiral Dane showed up himself to lend a hand with a special demolition squad. As Samus and Spike returned to the path to the seed, a Federation dropship descended, lowering a grav platform, a floating platform that stabilized a 1G gravity field on it, allowing it to ascend, descend, and collect injured troops in extreme conditions. Aboard the platform was a demolition squadron, lightly armored Federation troops carrying packs filled with high-grade explosions, along with Admiral Dane himself. His power armor currently had the faceplate retracted, so he could greet Samus and Spike face to face. Outstanding work, you two, he stated, a hint of admiration in his voice. I don't say this often, but I am impressed. It's not every day a pair of bounty hunters can complete their objectives at your level of efficiency, and saving your competition in the process. Speaking of, how are they doing? Samus asked. Rundus is fully recovered and eager to help out any way he can, Admiral Dane replied. Gore's already researching a way to deal with Phase, once we've found a way to get to it. And Gandrade is well on her way to making a full recovery, physically, anyway. For some reason, she hasn't been talking much. Probably feels violated by what Dark Samus did to her, Samus offered. Something like that, yeah, Gandrade interrupted, glancing away. Samus looked towards her curiously, wondering what could be going through the energy being's mind. In the meantime, Spike continued the story. That said, Dane continued, you've still got work to do. Up ahead is the pirate cargo line that leads to the seed. There is a large security door located at the end. 4 demolition troopers are needed to open the final door, so… Spike quickly pointed to 4 of the demolition troopers. On my back, he said bluntly. There's a reason I'm classified as a cavalry unit. The troopers, used to taking unusual orders, quickly clambered onto Spike's back. Dane chuckled. Good thinking, Spike. I could wish the Federation had 50 of you. So would the pirates, Samus muttered under her breath. But I'm glad enough to have the 2 of you on our side, Dane finished. The 2 of you are the only ones who can destroy the seed. We'll help however we can here, but if it's a choice between a trooper and you, make sure you survive. Understood? Yes sir, Samus said quickly as Spike bridled at the idea. What? Every pony save Celestia and Luna shouted in shock. Seriously? Twilight demanded in disbelief. He, seriously ordered you to sacrifice the troopers to keep yourselves alive if necessary. Battlefield logic, Twilight sparkle, Celestia stated sorrowfully. When it comes to planning a war, you can't think of your troops as individuals. You have to think in terms of numbers. And when you have troops with necessary, Unique capabilities, Luna continued, you must prioritize their survival over those whom you have many of. If things went the worst, Dane could always have sent Samus and Spike another demolition squad. But if Spike and Samus fell, there would have been none left to destroy the seed. The troops were expendable, and they weren't. I didn't like that any more than you do, Twilight, Spike growled. So I made certain it didn't become an issue. Once Dane had left, the demolition troopers used their bombs to start clearing the path. As soon as the path was open, Spike surged forward. He watched each door as it began to open, and blasted away with his frost breath as soon as they did. Pirate troops often tried to leap to attack as soon as the doors opened, only to get frozen solid. Spike then charged bodily through them. The combination of frost breath, sheer bulk, and Samus adding her own arsenal not only proved more than the defending pirates could handle, the sheer ferocity of Spike's assault actually sent some of the weaker pirates leaping onto active tram tracks rather than face him. The demolition troopers on his back were also staring in awe, terrified fascination as he tore through the defenses, sometimes literally. Samus' own observations were more worried. She always got nervous whenever Spike started becoming too ferocious in battle. With what the Chozo had told her about his nature on Talon 4 and what had happened on Ether, she couldn't help but worry that one day he might not come back from such ferocity, that she'd lose him forever to the beast within. Not that I could necessarily stop him if I had to, she thought silently as she saw him burst through the second wall by body checking it. At one point, a Berserker Lord tried to stop Spike's assault, but Samus was able to lock onto it with the X-ray visor and take out its brain with her Nova Beam. This cleared the path for Spike to lay waste to the smaller pirate troops, who stood no chance against his enraged assault. One last defensive force attempted to stop them, but Spike was able to easily crush them. With that done, the 4 demolition troopers got into position to detonate the final door. Once it was destroyed, Spike and Samus raced ahead. A pool of Phazon provided a way for Spike and Samus to rejuvenate themselves, but Spike only guzzled half the pool before charging on ahead. Samus had recovered just enough to race after him to keep an eye on him. She found Spike pacing angrily around before the final door, his eyes glowing as he growled. When Samus moved to open the final gate in the skylight to let her ship in, a pirate commando warped in to attack her. Before she had a chance to counterattack, Spike had seized the crimson armored pirate and crushed it in his claws before tearing it in half. Everyone was staring at Spike in a mix of concern, awe and a hint of fear. He sighed. I knew I'd be fighting Ridley soon, he explained. I could feel him, and he could feel me. And my armor had disengaged to let me adapt completely to the world's 40G environment. I knew I would need every advantage possible. So, I'd woken the beast inside me to full strength, sinking into it and embracing everything it could give me. He turned sadly to Samus. Sorry I scared you, Mom, but it was that or risk losing to him. I understand, Samus replied. Still, it would have been nice if you'd waited for me. Once Samus opened the skylights, she was able to call on the ship to destroy the last door with the ship missiles. As soon as the final door was blasted open, Spike leapt into the path revealed, roaring as he sped down the long tunnel. Spike! Samus shouted out, leaping into the ship and pursuing, not even waiting for her ship to land. Chapter 66, Corruption, Dueling Dragons. The inside of the Leviathan seed was much the same as the other two, half mineral and half organic with critters scampering around the inside of the first chamber. The only major difference Samus noticed as she hopped out of the ship was the valve-like door having been torn out of the wall, along with a good chunk of the wall, which was now weeping Phazon. Realizing Spike had literally torn through it, she quickly charged after him. She could hear the sounds of battle as she rushed through the narrow passage beyond, racing over the forms of some sort of defensive tendril creature that had been torn out at the root. The wall at the opposite end had been slammed outward, leaving a wide gap with ragged edges. Inside the central chamber, scorch marks, ice formations and water puddles, and dancing electricity covered the entire chamber. Huge openings high up in the four walls pulsed as 2 draconic figures swept in and out of them, alternately clashing and circling. Blood and other things rained from the air to the floor as the battle increased in intensity, and ferocious roars punctuated by shrieks of pain or triumph deafened the ears. Samus stared in awe as two equally powered dragons at their full strength did fierce battle with one another, all the weapons at their disposal being unleashed full force in a fury that could reshape worlds. Their movements were too fast for her to get a lock on Ridley. There was too high a chance she'd hit Spike. All she could do was watch. "Where's a popcorn vendor when you need one?" she thought silently to herself as she watched. Discord grinned widely as he snapped his talons, teleporting a bag of popcorn into everyone's hands, hooves, or claws as the case may be. "If only we could have seen the whole fight from the beginning," he pouted. "That would have been incredible." Spike hesitated. Actually, reaching over to his gauntlet, he disconnected the holographic projector. Setting it on the map table, it hummed. After a time, an image of the Leviathan central chamber was projected, with Spike visible charging in. "It fell off while I was charging, and that's how I discovered it could follow along behind me and record things." Excitement raced through the air around the table as everyone looked up eagerly to watch, as Spike prepared to fill in his thoughts at the various times. As Spike charged into the central chamber, he let out a challenging roar. He knew Ridley was here as guardian of the seed. He could feel it. It was time for Dragon to fight Dragon. Before he could react, Ridley dropped down from the ceiling, his bladed tail whipping around to stab him in the neck. As Spike pulled back, he felt his scales shift to cover the wound, but his visor gave him a status update. Phasic gland punctured. Healing in process. Estimated time to a complete recovery, 10 minutes. Use of phasic breath in the meantime highly dangerous. Fair enough, Spike growled as he prepared for battle. That would have made it too easy, anyway. Deciding not to give Ridley a chance to strike again, Spike lunged forward, wings mantled and teeth bared as he leapt, knocking his foe to the ground on his back. The two struggled for a time, wrestling for dominance as they exchanged strikes of claw, wing, teeth, and tail blades. Unable to get a clear strike with the points of their various weapons, they weren't able to do any serious damage to each other. Ridley managed to briefly get the upper hand, pinning Spike beneath him as he opened his mouth wide. Seeing metal plates hanging open over a wound in Ridley's chest, where he'd been injured back on Norian, Spike reacted quickly, sending a shock of electric breath into the wound. Ridley screamed in pain as he fell back, leaping into the air to try and gain an advantage. Spike quickly pursued him into the air. Spike pursued Ridley, firing blasts of flame, frost, and electric breath at him indiscriminately, trying to land a hit on him to take him out of the air. Ridley wasn't about to hold still for it, however, and fired back with his own flame breath and beams, blasts, and spheres. Spike managed to evade each blast, trying to close the distance. The pair began to circle each other both in and out of the central chamber, closing on each other for intense clashes where neither was entirely certain whose claws, teeth, and tail blades were whose. The only thing in either of their minds was rage, as both sought to tear the other apart. It was at this time that Samus entered the chamber, trying to get a lock on Ridley. After a time, she lowered her arm cannon, focusing on watching the battle, ready to leap in should Spike need help. Briefly, Ridley's eyes locked on Samus, and he snarled fury. Diving, he tried to attack her, only to get knocked to the side by Spike. Taking a page from what he'd seen Ridley do, he fired a sphere of electricity straight into the metal armor plates covering Ridley's wound. The electricity coursed through rapidly as Ridley screamed in pain. Samus quickly fired several ice missiles as Spike released a blast of flame breath, the mix of energies and temperature imbalance causing the armor plates to blast off of the enemy dragon. Snarling defiance, Ridley leapt back, calling Phazon onto his body to shape armor to protect his wound. With that done, he unleashed a Phazon-charged flame breath straight at Spike, catching him all along his neck. Spike screamed in pain as he fell back. Pushing himself to his claws, he shook his head as Ridley leapt into the air. He spread his wings to pursue, but Samus' hand was on his wing. "Spike," she whispered. "He's a better beast. Be a better hunter." Spike let the words percolate through his brain for a time, then nodded, reining in the raging dragon inside him. Lowering one shoulder, he let Samus mount as the spider ball tech magnetically attached Samus' armor to his own where she sat astride his shoulders at the base of his neck. Spreading his wings, he leapt into the air. Ridley cackled as he saw them approach. "Where is your pride, dragon?" he spat. "Not only do you debase yourself to serve this mongrel, but you let her ride you? You are no dragon! You are an overgrown lizard, and I will spit on your grave as I feast on your entrails!" He unleashed a barrage of flame blasts. Spike spread his wings wide and high, riding the thermally intense flame generated to claim altitude. "I am more than just dragon, Ridley," Spike growled back as he soared over him. Turning, he performed a brief aileron roll in the air, letting Samus aim straight at Ridley's skull and back with missiles before bombarding the internal vulnerabilities of the Phasite armor with her Nova Beam. "Yes, I am dragon! But I am also warrior!" Curving downward, he slammed his opponent to the ground in a dive, claws locked. "I am child! I am hatchling!" Ridley swept his tail up, and Spike latched onto it with his teeth below the blade and tore the blade out from the root. As Ridley screamed in pain, Samus leapt off. Ridley activated his hyper mode, and Samus hers as she held Ridley's upper jaw open. "And I am Chozo!" Spike roared out. As his visor informed him that his phasic gland was fully healed and ready for use, he opened his mouth wide and exhaled a huge blast of phased energy straight down Ridley's throat. Ridley's last scream of agony was cut off as his body exploded, blasting Spike and Samus backward and flooding their bodies with phazin. The recording cut off, as the surge of phazin had temporarily shorted out the recording device. It was good timing, however, as several of those observing had burst into cheers. Shining even went so far as to give Spike a friendly punch on the shoulder. "Nice one, bro," he shouted out proudly. Spike chuckled a bit. "Yeah, got a bit carried away there, I'll admit. Don't know where that bit at the end came from." "But what did you mean, Samus?" Cadance asked curiously. "About being a better beast or hunter?" Samus smiled. Drawing out his primal side full force like that, Spike was fighting like a beast. While he was a great deal more powerful, by nature Ridley's far more vicious than he could ever be, a much better beast. But you don't need to be a better beast to beat a beast. That's what hunters are for. She patted Spike on the other shoulder. He just needed to be reminded of that. "So what happened then?" Rainbow asked eagerly. Samus shrugged. "Another hyper mode option, hyper grapple, basically grapple voltage with phazin, and another seed destroyed. And then meeting up aboard the Olympus to plan the final stage." Chapter 67, Corruption, the final plan. "Before we get to the Olympus," Luna cut in, "I was wondering if perchance we might explore Spike's battle declaration at the end of the fight with Ridley?" She gave Spike a direct look. "You claim you don't know where it came from, but I recognize its nature. Whereas ponies have heart song, a spontaneous melody that can express a deep feeling from the heart, often causing many others around them to spontaneously sing along." "Wait, you mean Equestria is a land of spontaneous musicals?" Samus interrupted. Fluttershy gasped, stunned. You mean you don't have heart song? But then how do you know you belong within a community, welcome despite your differences, if your heart doesn't resonate with the hearts of others for the music that comes from within? You poor thing!" Samus stared at Fluttershy for a time before deciding to not explore the idea any further. "You were saying, Princess?" "Yes," Luna continued. "At any rate, where ponies have heart song, the dragons of our world have something similar they dub Heartfire, which takes shape in battle declarations that spring forth from the fire in their core without bothering to consult the brain. From the sound of it, that is what happened there." She looked carefully at Spike. "Proclaiming yourself warrior, distancing yourself from the bestial nature of Ridley, proclaiming you are not like him. Hatchling is a Chozo term for Samus, and how they referred to you as well, so that proclaims your kinship with Samus. Proclaiming yourself Chozo needs no explanation, as you declared your allegiance to their ways and morals. But, why proclaim yourself a child?" Spike glanced away, shooting a soft smile at Twilight. "I didn't understand at the time, but whenever I tried to make sense of it as I fell into slumber, I'd always have the some dream, a vague recollection of a warm hug, and a motherly voice telling me I was her baby dragon." Twilight blushed in pleasure as she glanced away. Luna smirked smugly at the sight. It turned out the Federation's plan was rather straightforward. Gore spoke up, directing the talk back to the story. Use the Leviathan orbiting the pirate homeworld to open a wormhole to Phase. Send the entire fleet to bombard the living Phasen planet and the pirate fleet surrounding it, while Samus and Spike went in to take down Dark Samus and the stolen Aurora unit. It was hoped this would cause a cascade failure that resulted in the planet's destruction, as the Aurora unit was known to be connected directly to the planet's control core. When the plan was explained to all of us, I expressed dissatisfaction. Foolishness, Gore stated bluntly as Admiral Dane finished the briefing. All heads turned to him. "Excuse me?" Dane demanded. "Do you have a problem with the plan?" "Several," Gore replied calmly. "First, the pirate fleet surrounding Phase will be constantly drawing power from it, meaning you will be dealing with ships in hyper mode. Your fleet will barely make a dent in the defensive formation, let alone in the planet. Second, while Samus would be able to maneuver past the defensive fleet to make planetfall in a best case scenario, the Phasen radiation in the area can be calculated as being 3 times as intense as the orange Phasen Samus encountered in Talon 4's impact crater. Not only would this be instantly lethal to Spike, it would overload Samus' head, causing an explosive growth of her Phasen infection. Even if she didn't immediately become completely corrupted, it would be a race against time in her own body to find Dark Samus and the Aurora unit and destroy both, when they could conceivably heal themselves from the planet around them, while just walking on the surface would push Samus towards total corruption. While Samus recognized all the hazards Gore was pointing out, she was ready to make the attempt, without Spike, in order to preserve the galaxy against the threat of Phasen. "We know the plan has problems," Dane barked out. "But unless you have a better one." "I do," Gore countered. Silence fell once again. "Well, don't leave us in suspense," Gandrada chided. "Let's hear it." "The first step is for Spike to eat the core of the Leviathan and orbit around the pirate homeworld," Gore explained. As Spike's ability absorption is based in situational requirements, this should enable him to open his own spatial rifts. Since the Leviathan is already programmed with Phase's coordinates, he will be able to open a rift gate right there, using the structure of the Leviathan as an amplifier. I've already run simulations based on the data collected on Spike's growth so far to confirm this will work. "And then what?" Dane demanded. "How do you intend to use that as a way to destroy Phase?" Gore turned, ignoring the Admiral. "Gandrada, I assume from the way you were able to absorb Spike's flame energy into your body that you would be able to enter a pure energy state and infuse him." Gandrada swallowed, plainly shocked. "Well, yeah, I could, but doing so will amplify Spike's energy abilities to immense proportions," Gore interrupted. "Combine that with the amplification of the Leviathan, and a full-powered Phase-It blast should cause a cataclysmic chain reaction that will utterly destroy Phase. Based on my calculations, the Federation's plan has a 15% chance of success, with a 60% chance of death for all involved. My plan, on the other hand, has a 84% chance of success, no chance of death, and failure will allow us to implement the Admiral's plan as backup, especially if we use the technology available to upgrade the Leviathan's energy generation and amplification properties." Once Dane got his ego under control, Rundus added, "That's the plan we went with." "He's a good admiral," Samus pointed out. "It only took him 2 minutes to calm down and agree to the better plan." Chapter 68, Corruption, Execution. "So everything went according to plan, then?" Shining Armor asked. "Pretty sure that's a first in military history." His statement brought a chuckle from several around the table. "More or less," Spike replied. "In addition to letting me create the rifts as expected, consuming the Leviathan core also granted me the ability to breathe in space." "How does that even work, anyway?" Twilight demanded angrily. "Breathing requires oxygen, and even as evolved as you've become, dragons need it as much as ponies, or any other race. How do you get oxygen from a vacuum?" "Molecular conversion," Samus explained. "He developed an organ alongside his lungs that uses the ambient energy of stellar radiation, anything from stardust to solar flares or ship engine residue, to convert carbon dioxide into oxygen, while the carbon left over is redirected to the flame sacks to burn for excess energy, to replenish what is used in the process. Twilight's eyes lit up in eagerness. Fascinating! She turned towards Spike, her horn lighting up as she subconsciously gripped her tools from her lab and her magic. Science later, Twilight, Spike scolded. Story now! Twilight chuckled ruefully as she blushed, the tools going back where they were. So once Gore, Rundus, and the Federation engineers finished improving the Leviathan for the big plan, Gandrita explained, Spike and I boarded to head off for the final battle. Spike sat calmly in the chamber in the center of the Leviathan battleship, cords both technological and organic hooked up to his claws, wings, tail, and face. It had been difficult figuring out how to properly hook him up in the cord chamber so that the amplification systems would work properly, and it wasn't exactly comfortable, but they'd finally confirmed it was all condition green. You ready, Gandrita? Spike asked. As ready as I can be, Gandrita replied, pacing back and forth, wringing her hands. So, emerging with you, when's that supposed to take place? After we come out the other side of the wormhole, Spike explained. That way we have the maximum amount of energy available for the final phase at blast. So you'd best do anything you need to do to get prepared now, before I open the wormhole. Right, Gandrita replied nervously, taking a few breaths to calm herself. She spent a few minutes just staring at Spike, before closing her eyes. Alright, I'm ready. And here we go! Closing his eyes, Spike focused his energy through the Leviathan, opening the wormhole. As they exited the wormhole, they saw the amassed fleet of the space pirates under Dark Samus' control surrounding the living Phazon planet. All were armed to the teeth, and the planet itself looked ready to defend itself. This could get ugly far before it gets pretty, Gandrita pointed out. Except without any Federation ships with us, they think we're one of them, Spike countered. You ready? Yeah, Gandrita replied, closing her eyes. Watch closely. Turning, Spike watched carefully as Gandrita arched her back, letting her arms hang limp, her head laying back against her neck. Her physical form began to blur and fade, leaving behind only bright pink and green energy in a rough humanoid shape. The cloud of energy slowly floated forward, and into him. It was like nothing Spike had ever experienced before. It wasn't just the sheer amount of energy thrumming through his body. He could feel Gandrita's heartbeat, the thrum of her thoughts, the pulse of her very life, all alongside his own as they slowly synchronized. His eyes glowed as he took a deep breath. The blast of phase it released by the Leviathan was enormous, larger than the Leviathan itself. It lanced through 3 pirate flagships before impacting with the planet itself, drilling down into the core. And the planet slowly unfolded, awakened to anger as it took on the shape of a massive Phazon behemoth, ready to tear us apart. Feeling the energy inside me, I released it all. The Leviathan amplified my ability to control my size, and I expanded into immensity until I faced off against Phase as a planet-sized dragon. That did not happen, Gandrita interrupted, shooting Spike a playful glare. I was there too, remember? Spike glanced away with a pout. Would have been awesome. He grumbled. Can we hear the end of that fight anyway? Scootaloo asked hopefully. What next? Hurling galaxies as shurikens? Rainbow added. That'd make an awesome secret ending to the game. Chuckling, Gore reached into his armor and pulled out a box of discs labeled TTGL. He slid it across to the pair. I'll provide you a means of watching these later, he promised. So what did happen? Luna asked curiously. In reality, I mean. Planet blew up, Gandrita replied bluntly. All Phazon vanished. Shockwave took out the pirate fleet and the Leviathan. Spike had to make his own way back through the wormhole. She smirked a bit at Spike. With me inside him. Spike blushed as he looked away. I wish you wouldn't put it like that, he grumbled. How else should I put it? Gandrita demanded, her temper flaring a bit. Nothing else seems to get through to you how significant it was. Significant? Spike shouted angrily, lunging to his feet. This is getting good, Pinky whispered, stuffing a hoop full of popcorn into her mouth, discord mirroring her actions. You didn't think it had no meaning, did you? Gandrada yelled, shooting to her own feet. Is that really how you think of me? Why are you putting it in that sort of context? Spike roared back, his tail lashing. What other context is there? Gandrada screamed out. You have no idea how big something like that is. I was 6, Spike roared out at the top of his lungs, bringing his clenched claws down on the table hard enough Twilight was afraid it would crack. And now it's creepy, Pinky whimpered, her mane starting to flatten. So was I. Gandrada wailed, her own fists slamming onto the table. And now it's freaky, Discord commented, his body bursting into blue flames for no apparent reason. Everyone turned to stare at Gandrada. Rundus was the first to speak. What? But... He gestured awkwardly to Gandrada, trying to express something without words. Physically, my people don't age, once our base forms are shaped, Gandrada explained. Once we develop enough to take on our base form, we're able to move about beyond our home world, or anywhere within it. Most don't leave. I was a prodigy. I wasn't even a year old when my base form took shape, and my mastery of the energy-based abilities my race possesses was leagues ahead of even some of our elders. But, I was still a child, and despite my talents was treated like one. She glanced up at the table. Can you imagine that? She struggled for words. It'd be like knowing how to calculate advanced thaumaturgical waveforms in your head and explain them completely, but no one letting you do anything but sit with the other kindergartners still learning how to brush their teeth, Twilight murmured. Gandrada nodded. Yeah, like that. Since I couldn't stand it, I left, but outside the homeworld, in the mostly human federation. She glanced towards Samus. Well, I look like this. What do you think happened? Young and innocent? Samus asked. Nobody cared what was in your head then either, just that your body was desirable. Exactly, Gandrada confirmed. So, just so I'd be taken seriously, I crafted a persona to use. A mask to wear, and I based it on someone I'd learned about, someone I could truly look up to. She smiled softly at her fellow hunter. You, Samus. Me? Yes. A strong woman, taking no nonsense from anyone, unafraid to do whatever it took, but the soft side of a loving mother? Gandrada chuckled softly. Who could be better? I idol worshipped you, Samus. It's why, when we were finally going to meet for the first time, I took on your form. Her smile was rueful. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, after all. And then I laughed, Spike said slowly, beginning to realize. And shot you the thumbs up. Gandrada nodded slowly. Yes. You were the adopted son of my idol, and you offered friendship. I wanted to get to know you, so I left you that bento. And you liked it, and after I saw you fight, I saw you as an equal as a hunter, and a possible friend. And... She glanced away. After Dark Samus shot us, when I awoke, you were there, making sure I was okay. Helping me through adjusting to what had happened. And, with the way you laughed and joked, and showed such worry for Samus, I saw the childish side of you. I knew you couldn't have been much older than I. And when you saved me... She shivered, a strange look in her eyes. You gave me some of your own energy, energy that is still a part of me. I don't know what it could mean for you, but amongst my people, such an act as the word that came out next was not galactic standard, and more a harmony of notes than actual words. It doesn't translate. But, it's the same thing for merging with you like I did. Your language doesn't have a word for holy, does it? Cadance asked calmly. Gandrada blinked. No, not really. But it doesn't fit. That's why you can't translate that word, Cadance continued. I can see it in you. The word you're looking for is sacred. Gandrada thought about it for a time. Yes, that sounds about right. And you wanted to explain that to Spike, Cadance continued, stepping forward to lay one wing over Gandrada's shoulders, the other over Spike's arm as he came closer. But you didn't know how. You couldn't find the words, and you fell back on the aggressive attitude you'd built for yourself, the mask you didn't know how to take off anymore, and the closest words you could find, however wrong they were. Gandrada could only nod as she sobbed into her crossed arms against the table. "I just wanted to connect with you, Spike, to tell you how much it all meant to me." Silently, Spike nudged Cadance aside. Wrapping his wing around Gandrada, he held her close, watching her with soft, compassionate eyes. Do you know what it's like, to forever try to find a place to belong, and people to belong with, only to always be left feeling you're the odd one out, not quite fitting in anywhere?" She sobbed. "All too well," Spike replied softly. "In both my lives." At this point, Samus was rather unsurprised to see all the ponies pile around Gandrada and Spike for a group hug. And given what she just heard of Gandrada's past, it was unsurprising that the energy being responded eagerly to the comfort. After a time, she chuckled ruefully. Over a decade of effort maintaining the image of a tough-as-nails hunter down the drain, she groaned softly. "Not if we don't let it!" Pinkie piped up. "We'll all just promise not to tell." She spun on Rundus and Gore. "Won't we, fellas?" As a favor to Spike, Rundus replied instantly, watching the pair. "Agreed," Gore added after a few moments. "Then repeat after me." Lifting a hoof, Pinkie demonstrated the motions, echoed around the table. "Cross my heart, hope to fly, stick a cupcake in my eye." After sharing a chuckle and letting the tension diffuse a bit, Samus spoke up. "I wish I'd known about all this back on the Olympus," Samus told Gandrada. "I'd have been happy to adopt you." Gandrada thought about that for a time, then shook her head. "Nah. As nice as that would have been." She sent Spike a flirtatious smirk. "This big guy's way too cute for me to see him as a brother." Whereas before Spike would have cringed away from such behavior, knowing what he did now, Spike managed to smirk back.